What the scariest true story you know? The story that inspired Candyman is pretty creepy. A woman in a Chicago apartment was murdered by some drug dealer who lived next door. How did he get into her apartment? Through a hole behind her bathroom cabinet mirror. My brother was a police officer. He had a call to check on the welfare of a mother who had not showed up for work. She had died on the sofa and her little toddler brought the little diaper pad and laid down next to her, and died of dehydration. The little kid had opened the lower cabinets and drawers in the kitchen looking for food. He still cries about it. And he's not the crying kind. The story of Christopher Dunch aka Dr. Death, who operated out of the Plano and Dallas area. He maimed 33 people and killed 2. He was an alleged neurosurgeon that didn't actually receive a proper medical education to operate, but still did so despite not fully being trained. No hospital would report him or take his license away. They would just pass him off to another hospital to continue injuring or killing people. He was the first doctor to be formally indicated with murder, and sentenced to life imprisonment. Germanwings Flight 9525. Wikipedia. The co-pilot locked himself in the cockpit and set the airplane for a slow descent into the French Alps. For 10 minutes, the crew desperately tried to get back into the cockpit. But in this post-9/11 world, the door was designed to withstand assault did not fail. This was a daytime flight. Passengers knew what was happening. They could see the mountains getting closer out the windows. This wasn't a quick, "What's that? OMG, out." This was a long, drawn-out realization of what was coming, and the end was inevitable. Chilling. This one kid back in the early 20th century named Bobby Dunbar. He went missing. And after like a year of searching for him, his parents came across a man with a kid who looked a lot like Bobby. They believed it was their kid. And after a legal battle with the kid's supposed mother, they brought the kid home. A wild-ass parade happened due to the missing kid's return. He lived and died believing he was, in fact, Bobby Dunbar. Well, a few decades later, his granddaughter asked Bobby's nephew, I think, for a DNA sample so she could see if her and Bobby's nephew were related. Turns out, they weren't. Meaning the real Bobby Dunbar is still missing and probably died alone without his parents. I grew up on a farm in the Texas Panhandle. The boxy part on top, in a house a few miles from ours. Most of the members of a family were randomly murdered. One girl, 10 years old at the time, survived by pretending to be dead. Texas Monthly. Articles, The Girl Who Saw Too Much. The blue ring octopus has a venom that causes paralysis, causing people to die of cardiac arrest or because of hypoxia. There is no antidote. The cure is CPR or life support for the hour or so it takes for the venom to leave the body. There was a man who was bitten by a blue ring octopus. As the lifeguard was performing CPR, he was lying on his back on the beach, facing the sky, eyes frozen open, unable to close his eyes or communicate with the others. He lied there as the sun slowly burned out his retinas. He became permanently blind. The Broken Arrow killings. 2 brothers brutally murdered their entire family. At one point their young, 5 or 6-ish, siblings were hiding in the bathroom when one of the brothers pretended to need their help. Soon as they let him in, he killed them. One of their last words were, "Please don't kill me, I love you." Horrifying story. The Nutty Putty Cave incident. A spelunker got stuck upside down in a narrow cave for 26 hours. Crews tried to pull him out with pulleys, but had to be careful not to break his legs, because that could be fatal with the circumstances he was in. Rescuers even almost dislodged him, only for an anchor to fail at the last second, plunging him back into the crevice. He eventually died, and they sealed the cave shut with him inside. One day, this kid gets taken to school by his stepmom for a big science fair. Things go well. He has his picture taken. Stepmom watches him go down the hallway to class, and he's never seen again. N.M. Wikipedia. Org. Wiki. Disappearance of Kyron Horman. Joseph Fritzl imprisoned his daughter in a secret room in his basement for 24 years, and fathered 6 to 7 children on her. My maternal grandfather, in the days before hot water on tap, put a big pot on to boil before leaving for work for his wife and kids to bathe with. The pot boiled over and extinguished the flame, and he returned to find them dead of carbon monoxide poisoning. My mother was of his second marriage. The story about the entire town in Iran that was buried under such an intense snowstorm. It smothered 4,000 people. N. Wikipedia. Org. Wiki. 1972 Iran blizzard. Also, that molasses flood that drowned a bunch of people. N. Wikipedia. Org. Wiki. Great Molasses Flood. During the Iran-Iraq War, an Ayatollah brainwashed the local boys' high school kids to voluntarily get on buses, get transported to the front line, and then knowingly walk over a minefield to explode the mines and die, so that soldiers can then charge the enemy. They even gave the boys plastic keys to get into the gates of heaven. that they wore around their neck as they knowingly walked to their death. High school boys. They dyed the local fountain's blood red to honor the blood sacrifice. Just horrific. I don't know if it's scary, but when I was younger, me and my twin brother would help our friend do his paper route. One summer we could smell something gross coming from one of the houses. We all didn't think anything of it until 3 days later when the smell was reaching down the driveway. We went to the back door where he normally dropped the paper and noticed it was open. We went in and looked around the house and found the owner dead. He had died of a heart attack and his cats were eating him. In 1949, Timothy Evans was wrongly executed for murdering his pregnant wife and daughter. The actual murderer, John Christie, was a prosecution witness at Evans' trial. After Evans was executed, Christie went on to kill 4 more people. Had the police handled the forensic evidence properly, Christie would have been caught when they were investigating Evans, and those 4 people would still be alive. The government didn't acknowledge that Evans was innocent until 2004. A guy in a sinking ship found an oxygen bubble and only drank a sip of Diet Coke every 7 hours. He was rescued after 60 hours after being under constant danger from drowning and even sharks. I worked in forensic medicine. My boss had to perform an autopsy on a chopped-off head that was found by 2 completely traumatized children. The autopsy itself took 7 hours because the person had over 56 different injuries to the head. This was posted here the last time. The story is about a woman who was found pushing her baby had been dead on a swing for 2 days. The baby died from hypothermia and dehydration. She was found not criminally negligent due to schizophrenia. Here is the article. Absolutely horrifying. Murder of Sylvia Likens. The parents of Sylvia Likens left her with her caregiver. The caregiver used her sister as a coercive threat and along with her children and their friends tortured and killed her. This true story was also made into a 2007 movie, The Girl Next Door, which was based on the 1989 novel, The Girl Next Door. A woman 2 blocks away from my house had multiple children and was pregnant again. I heard my mom talking about her. She has more kids than me and she about to have another? She's crazy. Mom had 6 of us. One day the lady wasn't pregnant anymore, and there was no baby to be found. Someone told the police about it. The police questioned them and raided their home. They found the newborn dead and stuffed in the freezer. Alison Botha. On December 18, 1994, Port Elizabeth resident Alison Botha was abducted, raped, stabbed and left for dead by Franz du Toit and Theuns Kruger. They slashed her throat 17 times, so deep she had to hold her own head on as she crawled to the road for help. With her other hand she had to hold in the organs spilling from her stomach, where she had been stabbed more than 30 times. By some miracle the knife thrusts had missed her main arteries, so she did not bleed to death and was able to breathe through her severed trachea. There is a documentary that is on Amazon Prime called Allison. Worth the watch but might be traumatic for some viewers. Trailer for Allison. My father used to work as a medical examiner. He was the guy they send when a crime scene contained a dead person, to give a preliminary examination of the corpse before it got sent off for more rigorous investigation. One of his worst stories was being called in for a child, around 9 or 10, that had ostensibly been killed in a drive-by shooting while he and his older brother were playing in the front yard. When my dad examined the corpse, however, the presence of gunpowder burns across his face indicated the shot must have been point blank. His older brother had lied about the shooting. He'd shot him himself. The story of the Lake Nyos disaster. The lake periodically belches a cloud of invisible carbon dioxide gas that suffocates everything within a 16-mile radius. In 1986, over 1,700 people and all their livestock died without even understanding what was happening to them. On 1983 in Juarez City, border neighbor to El Paso, had a Cobalt-60 incident. It is regards as the Mexican Chernobyl. Basically, some guys working maintenance in a hospital were greenlit to split for parts whatever they found at the old warehouse, and they found a machine that worked with Cobalt-60 pellets. The guys poked around and drove around town to sell their stuff and irradiated the city. The place they sold it to used the metal to recast as building materials and sell them. It's quite a horror story of the city I grew up in. The abduction of J.C. Lee Dugard. Kidnapped when she was 11 at her bus stop while her stepfather watched in horror by a paroled 6 offender and his wife. She was held captive for 18 years until found in 2009. He was supposed to be spending 50 years in prison for the kidnap and rape of a woman but only served 10 when he abducted JC in 1991. JC bore his children, 2 daughters, while in captivity, and they knew her as their older sister the entire time. The good news is, JC and her daughters were reunited with her mother and are doing well. I remember reading ages ago about a guy who was in the military. He got back home after a tour of duty to find his wife and 2 kids dead. They lived in a remote location. Turned out the mom had a sudden heart attack or stroke or something, and the 2 little kids had died of starvation or dehydration as they were too young to care for themselves. Not exactly a ghost story. But as a parent, that scares the shit out of me. Just heard today from my mom for the first time. My grandma grew up on a farm. She was over at a friend's for the night. And as they were getting in bed, the other girl said, "Oh, we forgot to check the pasture gate." They got out there and my grand says, "We locked this." Her friend's almost casual response, "I know. There's a man under the bed." It wasn't uncommon for drifters to show up places like that. And this was what they were taught to do. Chicago Tylenol murders. The Chicago Tylenol murders were a series of poisoning deaths resulting from drug tampering in the Chicago metropolitan area in 1982. The victims had all taken Tylenol-branded acetaminophen capsules that had been laced with potassium cyanide. A total of 7 people died in the original poisonings, with several more deaths in subsequent copycat crimes. No suspect was ever charged or convicted of the poisonings. The incidents led to reforms in the packaging of over-the-counter substances and to federal anti-tampering laws. The actions of Johnson & Johnson to reduce deaths and warn the public of poisoning risks have been widely praised as an exemplary public relations response to such a crisis. Someone close to me suffers from schizophrenia and the voices convinced them that they would chop up their so and child. They didn't have one, and should end their life. They tried to do that and thankfully their so got home early to see smoke bellowing from the kitchen. Both of them were safe. That's how the so found out that they had schizophrenia. We got them all the help they could and they are doing a lot better now. I know, not scary. Scary, but it was sure as hell one heart attack inducing moment for us. A few years ago, a dude dressed as a clown came to a camp one went to. Apparently he broke into the cabin I was staying in and stole stuff from some people in my cabin. He took primarily cash and a phone that kids had on them. I saw him there but I was so young I didn't think much of it. Apparently they couldn't find him because of the gloves he wore and his full body costume. All of the kids had their stuff replaced, but the craziest part is a few of us heard a scream that could not have come from a grown man that came from the road. That dude was weird and it was terrifying as an 11-year-old. The survival story of Mary Vincent, picked up as a hitchhiker. Mary was driven out to the middle of nowhere, raped, and left for dead, but not before her attacker chopped both her arms off above the elbow and tossed her over the side of the road and down a ditch. She crawled back up and onto a pitch-black desert road and followed the sound of the highway to try and get help. Denude, dirty, bloody, and missing both arms, she was picked up and rescued by a couple on their honeymoon. I'd link an article but you need to hear it from the mouth of Karen Kilgariff. My favorite murder. 247 champions in our own ways. During college, I lived in an apartment with a community pool. There were a bunch of us having beers at the pool one night over summer term, and one of my friends ran to jump in the pool but changed his mind at the last second. His feet slipped out from under him on the wet concrete and he went down. He broke his neck in the edge of the pool, never walked again and had extremely limited upper body function. I watched someone's life be ruined and it was terrifying. Listen to the lifeguard and walk. The Dnipropetrovsk maniacs. A group of 3 teenagers in Ukraine started out committing petty robbery. They moved on to torturing animals. Not long after that they just started murdering strangers. They killed a bunch of people by bashing the shit out of them with household tools for no reason. Knowing there are people like that in the world is terrifying. People who will just murder complete strangers just for their own entertainment. Edit. Added a missing word. Edit number 2. Yes, it's the 3 guys 1 hammer. I was avoiding that detail because I didn't want to encourage people looking for it, but so many people are asking that question that it seems like I have no choice. I like the story of Terare, the man who ate everything. Whilst in hospital he was accused of eating offal from the bins and a toddler went missing for which he was also blamed. He ate puppies and lizards. He ate a banquet for 6 on his own. He had very stretchy skin that would glow and sweat profusely after eating. He had frequent exudative diarrhea and an odor emanated from him which could still be smelled from a distance. He was shunned by society. A good explanation of his very interesting story, including his very short time as a spy, can be found on Wikipedia. Story of Aruna Shanbao. She spent 42 years of her life in a vegetative state after she was raped by a sweeper of the hospital where she worked as a nurse. What's more scary is the fact that the culprit never got punished and still roams freely. Pretty recent one that most people probably have seen the video. Couple were throwing snow across the street into the neighbor's yard. Yelling match ensues. Name calling, screaming. Neighbor goes inside and comes back with a handgun and starts blasting both the husband and wife. Goes back into his house and comes back with a rifle. Made sure both husband and wife were dead. Police were there in minutes and the dude killed himself. Basically all of it was on video. Apparently they had a long feud as neighbors and he just snapped. Explorers like a century or 2 ago went to look about the Arctic but had their supplies accidentally destroyed and soon they all ran out. They hunted a polar bear and ate the insides of it. No one at the time knew about how deathly a polar bear's liver was. Because of the high amounts of vitamin A, which can be bad for skin too, toxicity made him and his crew deathly ill, and when one of them felt that their foot was wet, he took it out and the lining of his skin came off with the boot. True story. TLDR. Explorers killed a polar bear, ate its liver, CSME under the effects of vitamin A, skin loss and toxicity, and most probably died. In my hometown there was a pastor who killed his wife. He was the priest at the church very close to my house, and he had given her sleeping pills to help her headache. Then he has drawn a bath for her and put her in it. After that he went to the church and prayed. When he got home his wife was dead. He called the cops and told them he tried to get her out but couldn't. When they got there he was completely dry. Pretty crazy stuff. My dad worked in a morgue during college in the 60s. One time on the night shift he was training a recent hire who was wheeling a body down the hallway. The body was under a sheet but all of a sudden started to sit up. The guy immediately freaked out, ran out the doors and quit. Apparently a dead body can have muscle contractions in the abs causing it to start sitting up. The more you know, I guess. I'm not sure what the entire story is, but there was a body discovered somewhere in Siberia. His cause of death was freezing. But something was off. Turns out, he had been attacked by a tiger. The tiger used his jaws and grabbed the guy by his backpack, picked him up over his head, and slammed him so hard that it snapped both of his femurs. Poor dude lived 3 days after the attack, crawling around in the snow. Edit. I appreciate the wholesome award, guys. N.M. Wikipedia. Org. Wiki. Great Molasses Flood 2. 3 million gallons of molasses exploded out of a poorly made container in Boston and flooded a neighborhood, killing 21 people and injuring 150. The scary part is hearing about how people tried to swim out of it but it was too thick. They got tired and would sink under the molasses slowly and suffocate as they tried to breathe. The thought of this death haunts me. I'm not claustrophobic, but I could imagine it being a total nightmare for someone who is. H. Holmes and the Murder Castle. He was formally accused of 27 murders but found guilty of only 1. These are his murder stats. 1034 killed 200 plus estimated possible. This is the related Wikipedia article. N.M. Wikipedia. Org. Wiki. H. Holmes. The Silent Gibbon twins. 2 sisters who rarely spoke except to each other. They were sent to separate boarding schools to get them to talk to other people but entered severe catatonia. They were eventually hospitalized and made a pact that if one of them died, the other must speak and live a normal life. They had a months-long discussion and decided which one should commit suicide. Eventually, one died of heart inflammation, no causes noted on the autopsy. And just moments after the planned time the other spoke. I'm free at last. Liberated. And at last Jennifer has given up her life for me. In 1983 an accidental large-scale nuclear war almost started by a Soviet satellite malfunction, only stopped by Stanislav Petrov disobeying orders. N. Wikipedia. Org. Wiki. Stanislav Petrov. N.M. Wikipedia. Org. Wiki. Slender Man stabbing. Slenderman has always creeped me out. Imagine taking a very good friend out into the woods and stabbing her more than 20 times, without feeling any empathy for having done so. And all in the name of a fictional meme on something awful. Well, this is scary in a weird personal way. But here goes. My grandfather was hit in the lung pretty bad by a sniper in WW2. The bullet would have hit him right in his heart. But at the last second he hunched a little bit to light a cigarette. So, if my grandfather wasn't a smoker, I probably wouldn't exist right now. The Rape of Nanking. You can watch the documentary on Amazon. It's some of the most brutal attacks upon men, women, children, and the elderly that I've heard. It's heartbreaking. Soldiers would stick something up a woman's angina to see how far it would go in. They would rape elderly women and children. They would sometimes let the prettier ones live. One soldier raped an 8-year-old girl in the street. There wasn't anything they could do but watch. I can't imagine the absolute pain and agony those poor people went through. The story of Thad Phillips. A kid in Wisconsin would kidnap boys and spend several hours a day breaking every bone in their legs. This poor boy finally escaped after countless hours of abuse over several days. His legs were swollen to the size of basketballs by the time he was found. Small Town Murder did an episode on it. Number 32. Hearing all the details and his initial attempts to escape will make you visibly cringe. Took days for me to stop thinking about it. Ariel Castro kidnapped 3 girls and kept them alive for years while he raped and impregnated them. He kept them locked away while he went to work as a school bus driver. One day he slipped up and left a door slightly open and one of the girls were able to scream for help. Cleveland, Ohio around 2010. An employee at my job killed someone behind building on his lunch break. Clocked out. shot him in the head, buried him in a shallow grave and clocked back in and worked the rest of the day. It wasn't discovered for a couple days. He came to work each day like normal. The cops showed up. They asked for his phone. He said no. They had a warrant. Searched the premises and found the kid out back. It was absolutely horrible. He worked there for 3 years before that and not one single issue. The police found phone books on his basement walls that they think he would shoot at. He pleaded not guilty, but was convicted and sentenced to life. I guess it's scary to me because I knew him for years and he was just a normal dude. My soccer coach used to tell us this story whenever we were practicing heading the ball. My coach said he had a player who went out of his way to head the ball as much as possible and got really good at it. But one time the ball hit him square on the top of his head and his tongue was out. The guy ended up biting his own tongue in half. You might think he was just telling a story, but he told it with such seriousness I 100% believe him. Scared me off heading the ball every chance I got. The tapes that the toy box killer would play for his newest victims, describing in detail what they were about to go through. While I haven't listened to them, I made the mistake of reading the transcripts. Holy frock. The fact that actual monsters like this exist is beyond terrifying. Those poor women. The Jonestown Mass Murder-Suicide. Jonestown, November 18, 1978. Location of the mass murder-suicide of members of the California-based People's Temple cult at the behest of their charismatic but paranoid leader, Jim Jones, in Jonestown Agricultural Commune, Guyana. The death toll exceeded 900, including some 300 who were age 17 and under, making the incident one of the largest mass deaths in American history. Britannica.com, event, Jonestown. There was a guy in my town who stalked women at the furniture store. He would watch women pick out new chairs and he would just linger there and drop these strange comments. That chair would look nice in my den. Then one night he followed one of the women home. He sneaked into their living room and then wait for them to enter the room. He'd then jump out and surprise them. He'd yell, "I knew you took my chair." And he'd scream and chase them. This happened over the course of 5 years. The local police never did anything because he was brothers with the sheriff. Women couldn't buy furniture by themselves. They had to start bringing chaperones. I lived next to a murderer. Faye Sweatlick was 6 years old when she was kidnapped out of her front yard. It was all over the news. I had news crews, cops, even the FBI all over my townhouse complex. My fiancé and I met with the FBI 3 times. They searched our home and everything. I remember clear as day. My fiancé FaceTimed me as the cops were digging through the trash cans directly in front of my townhouse. They pulled out her boot and a bloody knife. Then they found her body, dumped maybe 300 feet from my house. He had watched them find the murder weapon. Dumbass put it in a trash bag along with his other mail. He went to his back porch and opened his own throat. It's crazy. I had conversations with the guy. I never knew he was a psycho. This all happened a year ago. Not long ago I read about a couple who got left out on the Great Barrier Reef during a diving tour because of crappy business practices. They were never found, but they found a piece of something. Can't remember what it was. That had something like, "Save us before we die," scrawled on it. This is a true story from close to my hometown. A 1-year-old girl got killed by 2 dogs. They literally ate the little girl. Even worse, the owners of the dogs were also in the same family as the girl.